Do you have the sort of contempt in your heart for them? Why shouldn't?
I believe in facts.
But what's wrong with this?
So we can talk. So let's talk data. Let's talk data.
Let's talk data. I've got.
In this video, I'm going to review Vivek Ramaswamy's recent interview with Breaking Points. And guys, this one is significant. And stick around until the end because I am going to come in with some receipts and some very controversial takes. And you guys, I think, are going to really enjoy it. I've been working on this video for days. So with that, let's get into the first bit about money in politics.
Forward. One of the things that's different from me and every other single candidate in this race is I'm the only one who is not bound by the constraints applied by the mega donor class. This is the super PAC primary, absolutely. And I think we have a lot of super PAC puppets in this election. Last time around, it was Jeb Bush and Scott Walker. This time we have a lot more.
So is Ron DeSantis a super PAC puppet?
Well, you can look at whose campaigns are principally funded by super PACs and follow the facts for yourself. But what I will say is that I am unconstrained by that. I've put in $15+ million already of my hard-earned money precisely because I did not want to take a tin can, ring a hat in hand, and ask a bunch of donors for permission to run because that comes with constraints. And so when we're talking about the issues we really need to tackle, shutting down the administrative state, from the FBI to the ATF to the IRS to the Department of Education to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, where I've laid out unprecedented clarity in exactly how we will do it on strong legal authority. Declaring independence from China, very touchy issue in the Republican donor class. Other issues that I'm tackling, other candidates are constrained if they're tied to mega donors that have interests that stop them. My position on Ukraine, very similar.
Let me ask you a follow-up on the super PAC thing, because I think that's interesting that you have that critique of money in politics. I mean, would you push for a constitutional amendment to change that? What would you do to try to diminish the influence of that money in politics? And also, equally, isn't it just as problematic that, you've been a very wealthy, successful guy, that you're able to, with your own cash, really impact the course of this race?
I think that is significantly less problematic, Crystal, because people can at least judge that on its own terms transparently. I think it is far more problematic when you're a representative and a puppet for somebody else's interests. Yeah. And I think that there's a big difference there, right?
So would you do anything about that,
putting money for the race. So here's what I would do. One thing I would say is, if I'm the nominee, as I expect to be, in the general election, I'll throw out a pass to Joe Biden or whoever my opponent is to catch. Remember, the left was the one that preached Citizens United in 2010, wanted money out of politics. I'll say this. We'll make a handshake deal that we both shun super PAC money. We're not going to show up at events where a super PAC representative is also present.
You're not looking for any sort of legislative change, though?
Well, I'm going in order of what's actually achievable because Citizens United is a complicated holding, and this is complex terrain, and I've spent years studying this. I share much of the left's agita with the influence of money in politics. Read Woke Inc. carefully. That's what the book is about, actually. So that's the first thing I would do, and I would make that deal with anybody else in this Republican primary. The other thing I would say is there's a difference between super PACs and PACs, right? So there are these 501c4 entities that have, such a complicated, unnecessarily Byzantine arrangement. But there are certain rules that say, hey, at least there's certain kinds of money in these other kinds of tortured legal creations where it can't advocate for candidates specifically, but can advocate for issues. I think that's actually a reasonable middle ground to say that people still have their First Amendment protections using their own money to advocate for issues or for issues of public importance without actually throwing that money behind a candidate alone. And so this is complicated. It butts up against complex First Amendment jurisprudence. But I think the easiest way to lead is through action. And so I'll make a deal with anybody I'm running against. And if they abide by it, I'll commit to do the same. Shun the super PAC game and revive actually a race that is about one person, one vote. One person.
So for those of you who aren't aware, PAC means
a political action committee, or PAC for short.
And it's a way of pooling donations for a specific political campaign. PACs, however, are different to super PACs because PACs can't take donations of more than $5,000 from an individual and can't take donations from corporations. But in 2010, a Supreme Court union known as Citizens United said that this was actually a violation of freedom of speech and that spending is a form of speech. And this led to the formation of super PACs, who can give unlimited funds from people, corporations, and unions. So obviously this creates a bit of an issue in terms of corporations and special interest groups being able to lobby candidates, and it opens the door for a lot of corruption. And this is a giant appeal of a candidate like Vivek or Trump, because they have fuck you money. They don't necessarily need the money or the backing of these corporations, and they can actually put their hand in their own pocket. And I'm certainly not saying that they're not interested in big money or big interest groups. That is not what I'm saying. I don't think that there is a human being alive that could resist that when they get to those sorts of levels, and could resist having some sort of a bias to the field that they practiced in, or to their friends in high places. But what I am saying is that I trust somebody who has made their own money a lot more than somebody who has built a career off of leveraging their political position to make money, i.e. the Clintons and the Biden family. So I'm interested to know what you guys think in the comments below about that topic. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Looking forward to reading your comments. And now on to the next bit of the interview, where Crystal tries to debate Vivek about climate change, and Vivek starts dropping bombs like his name is Barack Obama.
Looking at which party that this would benefit, and but I'm just one person. People can make their own decision. But speaking of the discourse, one thing that I wanted to ask you, I've listened to a lot of your interviews. I think you've gotten a lot of attraction online. You're coming up in the polls. Like, I think people really need to pay attention to what you're saying. And when you talk about people who are concerned with climate, you call them climatists. You call them climate cultists. Let's just put some of these news stories up on the screen here. You've got record high temperatures that are causing increasing death in Arizona. You've got workers who are dying from heat exhaustion. You've got people who are being choked by wildfire smoke from Canada. You've got an entire state of Florida that's basically uninsurable at this point. And the American people are living this reality increasingly at this point, and an overwhelming majority of them, some 2/3, say, yeah, this is a concern for me. So do you have the sort of contempt in your heart for them that comes out in that language when you would describe them as climate cultists?
Guys, if you enjoy seeing me go in on these issues, and if you think that more people should see this, hit that like button for me, and also subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and if you value this type of discussion. Back to the clips.
I have no contempt in my heart, Crystal. I have deep sympathy for people who are hungry for purpose and meaning and have relocated their desire for faith to the faith in climate instead.
But why shouldn't,
I believe in facts.
I believe in facts. What's wrong with this?
So we can talk. So I
people are experiencing this in their own lives right now.
So, Crystal, in any other context, if the trust the science crowd were persuaded by lived experience of individuals of something that's actually a macro phenomenon, you would laugh them off the stage as a bunch of rubes who weren't data driven. So let's talk data.
Well, let's talk data. Let's talk data. I've got some data that I can put up on the screen. Go ahead and put the next, and then I want to hear from you. Go ahead and put the next pieces up on the screen. We've got some record lows in terms of Antarctic sea ice extent. We've got ocean temperatures that are smashing seasonal records. We had just the hottest June on record.
I think it might be helpful for me to lay out my views, Crystal, because I think you're saying things I agree with.
Okay,
you're saying things I agree with.
Tell me what I'm getting wrong here, and why this is not something that people should be concerned about, and why they're in a cult if they are concerned about it.
Sure. So let me lay out some hard facts, both about my views and facts on the ground.
Okay. Sure.
Are global surface temperatures going up? Yes. Is that likely due to man-made causes? Yes. Is that an existential threat to humanity? There is no evidence to support that. To the contrary, 8 times as many people die of cold temperatures rather than warm ones. The Earth today is more covered by green surface area than it was even a century ago, because carbon dioxide is plant food. Plants actually grow in slightly warmer climates. The climate disaster-related death rate is down by 98% over the last century, directly attributable to more abundant and plentiful access and use of fossil fuels. So I want to be really clear about my view. This is not does climate change exist or not? It's the wrong framing of the question. The question is, what impacts human prosperity, human flourishing, in a world in which there are net positive and net negative effects of climate, but also net positive and net negative effects of the use of fossil fuels? I also find it to be a mystery, and it's a mystery maybe you can help me solve, Crystal. Why is it that many of the people who are the staunchest opponents to carbon emissions are also among the staunchest opponents to hydroelectric energy or to nuclear energy? I think that suggests there's something else going on.
There's
Why
been
the
quite a
different
shift.
standards for China?
Let me
think
just
that there's
say-
something else going on here. That's my point about there's a religious conviction that goes beyond a commitment to the facts.
Let me just say that even Greta Thunberg, who comes in for a lot of criticism as a quote-unquote climate cultist, is now in favor of nuclear energy. I agree with you on nuclear that should be more of a push, by the way.
If you want to stick to Greta, I actually respect Greta for one thing. She's honest. She says it's not just about the climate. It's about social justice. It's about climate justice. It's about equity. So these are things that at least she is actually an honest statement of what the movement stands for.
If you're living in a poor neighborhood in this country, you're more likely to be affected by, the toxic plants and toxic chemical
Disagree.
plants. And,
you're more likely to be affected by
water.
restraints on fossil fuels is actually what you're likely to be affected by.
I wonder
People
if
are
you
dying
have
because
followed,
of lack of access to fossil fuels.
I wonder if you've followed, though, what's happening in, because you're a capitalist, you're a successful business guy, so you certainly understand the way that markets work. You look at Florida, you look at Louisiana, you look at Texas, Colorado, California. These are all places that insurance companies, home insurance companies, are pulling out of because the risk of catastrophic weather, extreme weather, is so great now that it doesn't make sense for them to insure in these marketplaces. Florida, you talk about the human impact. Florida is becoming virtually uninsurable because of the lack of home insurance companies that are willing to operate in this state. So I don't know how you can look at the situation right now and say that, there aren't already extreme costs being imposed on people, not to mention workers who are falling out from heat exhaustion, et cetera.
So, Crystal, I don't take my facts on the climate change debate from what the home insurance market is actually doing. In many ways, that's distorted by the same climate cult manifest through the ESG movement, because the shareholders of these companies, BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, are effectively requiring them to behave that way. Why are they doing it? It's because CalPERS, State of New York, and large pension funds have said they won't invest with the large asset managers unless they're signatories of the Climate Action 100+ network.
But
that's
let me say on
$68
that
trillion.
too.
So I've written books about this. We can go into as much depth as you want.
I know you have, but you do know.
Yes, Vivek, this is important. He's just pointed out the enormous problems with the logic of people like Crystal, who just want to call you a climate denier for having extremely reasonable objections to this highly politicized and consequential issue. How about we don't change the entire course of history, wipe out a giant chunk of our population, and dramatically diminish our way of life without seriously analyzing the data and having this debate? And I could go through her points here one by one and break them down, but I think Vivek did a great job, especially about the insurance companies and their ties with the ESG movement, and also about how cold weather kills so many more people than warm. And those are topics for a whole nother video, but what I do want to talk about here is when Vivek alludes to that there is something else going on here, and that these cultists have a religious conviction, and one that goes beyond the factual and the reasonable. And side note, when he says cultists, and when I say it for that matter, we don't mean people who are concerned about the climate, and even people that think that we should be doing more to combat the issue. We're talking about people who worship at the altar of climate change and who are willing to perform giant human sacrifices to please the sun god. And if you guys have been following this issue, you'll know that Vivek is showing some serious balls here by pointing out the greening of the earth that is taking place and the positive effects of CO2. For the longest time, it has been that you are an extremist if you dare point out that CO2 may not actually be the worst thing in the world, because CO2 is the devil and shut up. And Jordan Peterson's been doing some great work in this regard, and he's been piggybacking off the works of the likes of Bjorn Lomborg, but even he thinks that this is not a hill worth dying on and doesn't really go too hard at the issue. But then you get individuals like Dr. Patrick Moore, for example, who is a real environmentalist. In fact, he's one of the co-founders of Greenpeace, who left the organization when it was hijacked by the radical left. And also Matt Ridley. These guys are talking about the fact that there is in fact a greening of the earth that is happening due to the slightly warmer climate that we are experiencing. Some of this can be explained by more rainfall, meaning that we have slightly warmer climate. So there's more evaporation from the ocean, more moisture in the air, more rainfall, and hence more greening. But another reason for this is because of the increased levels of carbon in the atmosphere. And guys, this is happening in at least half of the world and in some of the most unexpected places. The same places that were predicted to become arid wastelands, such as the Sahara Desert. I wonder why they don't show this phenomenon in the fear-mongering documentaries where they've got the little numbers on the side, the countdown clocks. And I wonder why we're always hearing about the destruction of the Amazon rainforest and how rapacious human beings, greedy human beings, are just mowing it all down, making more and more room because of the out of control surging population that requires more and more farmland. When actually the Amazon is greening and we are using less and less farmland. And also the narrative that we are overpopulated is BS in itself. But in terms of farmland, we use 65% less land to produce the same amount of food in 2010 as we did in 1960. And these measures were done using actually very conservative predictions about how population may grow, how much meat populations from poorer countries will eat as they get richer, etc. Even with pretty high rates of human consumption and growth, we will still need less farmland going into the future. How is this possible, you may ask? Well, it's a little something called nitrogen fertilizer. In 1908, a German chemist by the name of Fritz Haber, which is, by the way, what I'm going to call my firstborn child, developed a chemical method for utilizing the fact that 78% of the air is composed of nitrogen. He discovered a method where he could take nitrogen from the air and bond it with a chemical known as hydrogen and create something called ammonia. Ammonia can then be injected into the soil where it is converted into nitrate. And this process was later used by a man named Carl Bosch to create these nitrogen fertilizers on an industrial scale. This is one of the greatest and most revolutionary inventions ever created in the history of mankind. It allowed us to become orders of magnitude more efficient with farming. Without this, we would only be able to feed about 4 billion people. But how do we make nitrogen fertilizers? You need fossil fuels. But guys, this is where, in my interpretation, it gets a bit sinister. You might remember the Dutch farmer protests that were happening last year. This was happening because government bureaucrats who have never seen a farm in their life were implementing restrictions on these farmers, trying to force these people who have been cultivating this land for generations to transition to a more sustainable farming, using biofuels to combat the supposedly catastrophic nitrogen emissions. So just to recap that logic, they want to cut the emissions by depriving these farmers of the very thing that has meant that they don't need to use nearly as much farmland to create more food. The very thing that allows these great farmers to feed our world. Makes heaps of sense, right? Now, this will obviously cripple the Dutch farming industry if fully implemented. And it's not just Holland, guys. This is happening worldwide. This is coming to a farm near you. And this ties into the whole ESG score agenda. And it's also where the whole meme about eat the bugs comes from. No. They actually want you to eat bugs. Because in terms of saving human lives, feeding growing populations, and enriching the poorest people in the world, nothing has been more effective than cheap energy. And there is, like some great experts have been saying, a very strong case for fossil fuels and a warmer climate. So maybe, and I'm no expert on this, but just maybe, everything we have been told about climate and about fossil fuels is wrong. And I'm certainly not married to this idea by any means. I'm totally willing to have my mind changed, but I do think that this debate needs to happen. We need to be able to understand both sides here and not let censorship and slander dictate our worldviews. So if you keep watching the channel, I will keep chipping away at these issues, and I've also got some great guests hopefully lined up to keep you guys armed and dangerous on a new level. So with that, check me out on all my socials as per usual, guys, and hit that link if you want to watch another video. Click right here. Until next time, I'm Jake. This is RattlesnakeTV, keeping you armed and dangerous.